And now we have our next guest joining us, Adam Scott Bellos. He is the host of Janice's Wine with Adam and CEO of the Israel Innovation Fund and Wine on the Vine. Adam, tell me, is
Adam,
that coffee in there?
There is not coffee
Adam,
in
tell
my
us
cup.
what we're drinking tonight.
We are drinking the Gush Etzion Red Blend. It is a fine Judean wine. Thank you for having me, guys. I'm so happy to be with both of you because I love both of you so much.
Well, we're happy to have you.
Crazy night tonight, huh? Like,
Absolutely.
you could feel it in the air how special today is. It's like everybody knows something big is going to happen.
Well, we're going to find out very shortly. In the meantime, let's kind of talk about the different possibilities that this night could lead to. Will Netanyahu have enough to form a right-wing government and make his comeback?
You're asking me what I think.
And, what type of government could he form?
So apparently, as of right now, Shas has just shut down their post-election party. And there's a rumor going around that the Likud might be shutting their post-election party down too, which could necessarily not be so good for Likud, or it could mean that something serious is going on and, they might be already starting to negotiate with people behind the scenes because there's work to be done. But at the end of the day, the last 5 elections have been about 2 things. It's been a cultural referendum on what the culture of the country and the political culture of the country should be and who the leader of the country should be. So, it's been a BB conversation since the beginning of this election cycle. It's also been a cultural conversation that's, what type of government is it going to be? Is it going to be left? Is it going to be right? Is it going to be religious? Will it be secular? But to answer your question, there's only 2 possibilities. Either Benny Gantz or Bibi Netanyahu is going to be prime minister. And I think based on the voter turnout being so high, I think we're looking at a Netanyahu government. Who's going to be in that government? It's going to depend on, in my opinion, how many seats Ben Gvir gets and how many seats the Arab parties are able to pull together. So I think if they cross the threshold and even make it to 5, I think we could be looking at a very different government than if they only get 4. It's anybody's game, but at the end of the day, Netanyahu has been biding his time, allowing, like Alex was saying, for this government that didn't really have an ideological focus to fall. And this was political strategy at its best with Bennett and how they were able to outmaneuver Netanyahu, but at the same time, I think that the fox of Israeli politics knows what he's doing. And if anybody can get what they want, it's Bibi Netanyahu.
But you mentioned...
Benny Gantz and Netanyahu, you've counted out Yair Lapid.
I don't think people want Lapid as the leader of the country. I think he represents something that a lot of people believe in. I think that there are many people that... I was originally involved with the Yesh Atid party when it started in 2013, but it's not the party that it once was. And I think that a lot of people are rather annoyed with Lapid's ability to make everything about himself. And if he doesn't make it about himself, he makes it about Bibi in a negative way. And Lapid's go-to attitude is to go super positive or super negative. And there's no kind of in-between with him, at least in my opinion of the reading of him.
So Adam,
Yeah.
I know quite a few people who would actually disagree with you on that statement, who, are very ardent Lapid followers,
For
who
sure.
actually believe that Lapid could be the next prime minister. That raises a lot of questions because, first of all, will the ultra-Orthodox agree to sit in a government, even if it's led by Benny Gantz, along with Yair Lapid? That's one question. The second question is, we've seen Bennett, we've seen Lapid, and we've seen Gantz sit in this past government with Ram, the Arab Party. Will they sit in another government with the Arab parties if it means the difference between, leading the next government or being in the opposition?
So I'll answer the first question first. The Haredi parties will definitely sit with Gantz. And that's going to be a huge blustering to what he's doing right now and his ability to negotiate, because they've been somewhat of a linchpin in making governments. In terms of sitting with the Arab parties, listen, if you've done it once, you'll do it a second time.
But the Haredi did not sit with him previously.
Correct, but at the same time, Gantz is not a staunch secularist. he's a cultural Jew. I mean, he was. I mean, I remember there was this beautiful photo of him shaking the lulav with tefillin on and his talit on, and that speaks to religious voters that he's connected to Jewish tradition and religious observance, so to speak. And I think that the biggest thing that's very important to remember about Gantz is two things. One, everybody has constantly written him off and says he's not going to get to the place that he ends up getting to constantly. I mean, we've seen this in the last 4 elections. Everybody thought he was a done deal, I believe, after the second election when he had the government with Netanyahu. If that was the first or the second election, I lose track. We've had so many. And he ended up coming out way on top. The other thing that I would say is that I don't think that you can rule out the fact that everybody could technically sit with him, unlike Netanyahu, and that's where the question of the night is going to be. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens. I think that everybody should have a very open mind on the possibilities of what could happen. Personally, I think that Netanyahu will pull this together just because this is what he wants, but and he's been good at politically maneuvering since the 80s. I mean, the guy is the fox of Israeli politics, so to speak. I mean, he's been the leader. He's driven the country's agenda forward for the last 12 years. It has nothing to do with whether or not I like him as a person, but I mean, like, realistically, he's got the biggest shot. But I just can't logically rule out Gantz as a major possibility of being able to bring the country and the parties together. Are you guys following? Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's
so.
right. And ultimately, it is the parliament that selects the prime minister. And
Right, so let's talk a little bit
That's a
about
very good point.
how the
Yeah.
voting works here in Israel, because it is a very complicated
It's
process.
very different from the United States.
So the exit polls are coming in just a minute. Adam, I want to hear final thoughts from you on tonight.
I think it's anybody's game. I really think it can be up in the air. I still think very much that Bibi will do whatever he has to do to regain his power, given that he wants to make peace with Saudi Arabia, and he feels that he's the only person that could do it. At the same time, you cannot rule out the fact that Benny Gantz may be the person that will actually be able to bring the country together in terms of all of the different political parties. So I think that we'll know more as the exit polls come out, but I will say this final thought. I mean, I know this isn't going to be my final thought of the night, but final thought for this segment. Pre 10 p.m. polls closing, I think we'll have a government by the end of November. And I think that the Israeli people are tired of this. And I think the politicians are tired of this. And I think that given that there was such a large voter turnout, they're saying this is the largest voter turnout since 1999. I think that means the country is done with these elections and that we want a finalized government.
Adam, thanks for coming back.
No problem. I'm so happy after seeing the exit polls.
So, what are your thoughts?
I think this is Benjamin Netanyahu's world and we all live in it. To be completely honest. I mean, fortunately, that was kind of where I saw things going, and it looks like that's what's going to happen. But there is some talk that the Arab parties might be able to cross the threshold up to 5 seats right now. So it might be a total of 10 or 8 seats to the Arab parties. And if that's the case, like I said earlier, that could upset Bibi's entire possibility of forming a government. But we don't know anything yet, and there's the possibility that there could be a margin of error. Earlier today, like we were saying, and I know you guys have mentioned it multiple times, this was one of the highest voter turnouts since 1999, and earlier today they were saying there was an extremely low Arab voter turnout, which didn't really make much sense to me because since 2 elections before this crazy cycle, the Arab voter rate had been steadily rising. So I would actually assume that if I'm an Arab Israeli that has the ability to vote in Israel, which all Arab Israelis do, I would be taking this election very seriously because I would understand that the future of the country is actually going to be depending on the Arab vote. And that's a new situation for Israel to be in, which is very interesting, and that adds a great deal of nuance that's necessary to reading the political landscape and making a correct political assessment. So I mean, like if just thinking about what I said earlier, you always get political pundits going on television just saying whatever comes to mind without taking the full account of the political field into what they're saying. And I think it's very important right now that that be taken into account. We have no idea what is going to happen with the amount of votes that the Arabs will receive. And if they receive 8 to 10 mandates, that's huge. I mean, that's more mandates, I believe, than any of the Arab parties have ever received in combined. I mean, that would be the largest Arab bloc, I think, in Israeli history, unless I'm wrong.
Well, Ram and the Joint List together had 10
last time
in the fourth government,
right?
And in one of the previous governments that didn't last. I mean, one of the previous election cycles, they actually climbed all the way to 13. To 13 seats.
Right.
Oh, they did. They did. Okay.
And what that does, I think you're bringing a very important point. Is what that does is that it shrinks the number of seats for Zionist parties, either on the right or the left. And what that means is that it becomes harder for example, Netanyahu to get to 61 because it's not 61 out of 120. It's 61 out of 120 minus however many Arab seats there are. So if the Arab seats go up to 10, as they were in the last election, or beyond, that's that many less seats that Netanyahu has to work with in order to form a right-wing government. And showing here in these polls that Netanyahu's bloc got 61 or 62 seats, that's not enough to definitively declare Netanyahu the victor, especially if the Arab parties or any of the other parties in the bloc might get 1 or 2 more seats after the actual counts take place.
I mean, it's all going to depend on what type of government Gantz will be okay with forming if Bibi is not given the opportunity to form the government first. It doesn't seem like it was a very popular thing that they formed a government with the Arab parties amongst the majority of the country. Now, I do believe that it was, I mean, listen, it was a huge thing, this last national unity government. It was a big deal. You had many parties saying they were doing what they were doing in favor of the country's future, and that that bringing in the Arab parties was a move forward in the evolution of Israel. And there's definitely water to that argument, especially if you read Alta Newland, by Theodore Herzl. And I understood where Lapid and Bennett were coming from when doing what they did and rationalizing things the way they did and wanting to have, a move forward into the future that's the post-Netanyahu era. The problem is that Israel is not actually done with the post-Netanyahu. I mean, there is not a post-Netanyahu era. We're still in the Netanyahu era. It restarted during the Arab Spring when he came back into office. And we're still dealing with agreements and peace agreements and the situation that he created for Israel. So, like I said earlier, we're going to have to wait to see what happens with the Arab vote. But I will say this. I don't think that Gantz is going to throw away the opportunity to have a steady 4-year government as defense minister, okay, if he can form a government with Bibi. And I don't think Bibi is going to be so petty to not form a government with people just because they've messed around with him in the past. I mean, Bibi's the ultimate, when I was at the University of Arizona studying Israeli history, I had a teacher named Shlomo Aronson. His grandfather was the first chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, and he used to have this saying, Zionism is pragmatism, and you can't have Zionism without pragmatism. Bibi is the ultimate political pragmatist.
But it looks like over the last cycles that the other members of the government had not been pragmatic.
True.
Yeah, and they would not sit with Netanyahu, not the other way around.
I have a serious question for you. Do you think the majority of the public wants a 6th election?
I don't think the
Absolutely
government
not.
wanted
I don't think
a
anybody
second,
wants.
third,
Right.
fourth, or fifth election.
Yeah.
The reason why I say that is because of the voter turnout today. It's very clear that the Israeli people are done with this.
Maybe the opposite. Maybe if they're coming out to vote, they like voting and they'll be happy to vote next time
it's a
as well.
testament to how much we love democracy here in Israel.
It's a day off, right?
There have been more elections in Israel than there have been in the rest of the Arab world in the last 100 years.
But I do think Israelis are looking forward to a stable,
yes,
4-year government. The question is how that government's going to look like. So, Adam, we are almost out of time, and I want to hear your final thoughts for the evening.
Here are my final thoughts. I do believe that Netanyahu will be able to form a government. I believe that he's probably going to bend over backwards to work with even the people that said that wouldn't work with him. It's always been a mistake. Especially, I just keep thinking of Shelley Yakimovich years ago. I will not sit with Netanyahu.
Former head of the Labor Party.
Former head of the Labor Party. And it ended up being the biggest mistake that she made because she could have taken Avodah to new heights if she would have gone into that government. Either way, there's two possibilities, like I said earlier. Either Benny Gantz or Netanyahu will end up being prime minister. And at the end of the day, those are two great Israeli men and who have sacrificed a lot for this country, who have the narrative to be national leaders. But if you're going to ask me who I'm going to put my money on, it's going to be Netanyahu.